today is retired federal agent and professor of criminal justice Kenneth. He will discuss how he was able to navigate bureaucratic politics during his career, which involved working for or within the U.S. Army, the Department of Justice, the Department of State, the CIA, the Department of Interior, and the Department of Homeland Security. He retired as a senior special agent and began his second career in higher education. He currently runs a criminal justice program at Lamar State College. Mr. Kyle has earned 2 undergraduate degrees and 3 graduate degrees in the fields of criminal justice, industrial technology, education, forensic psychology, and criminal justice. So how's that for a Renaissance man? While working in higher education, he has developed numerous courses and training programs, including the creation of the undergraduate criminal justice program at the University of Arkansas. And if you're not familiar with it, it's a large program, and it's gone on to have accolades for the work that he did there. He has published a number of articles on the topics of education and criminal justice. His current projects focus on insanity and the evolution of zip guns. And if you're not familiar with what that is, it's homemade firearms. So we were just talking about that project, and I'll give you some more information as it presents itself, but it sounds like a fascinating area of research, especially in the realm of narco-terror. All right, before we begin, please make sure that you have your technology turned off, cell phone silenced, so that we don't interrupt our guests. There will be a video recording, so we want to make sure any distractions are minimized. All right, welcome Professor Cowell to Brookhaven College.
Hi, I'm glad to see all of you here. I really enjoy doing something like this with students. I'm going to talk about a variety of topics in the field of bureaucracies. We already had a brief discussion. I had it with one of your faculty members about bureaucracies. You know, there's sort of a pejorative connotation with bureaucracies, but the reality is it's the only way to get things done in a society. So it's not really bad stuff necessarily. I will say a lot of negative things just because I'm kind of a negative guy. But you know, a little bit about me, not much else I can tell you. I really was a foot soldier in the federal bureaucracy for a long, long time. But before that, I was a police officer in New York. And before that, of course, I was in the military. And we'll discuss a little bit about the interplay between the military and other elements of the federal government, because it's more important and it's more subtle than just another organization. This is where I'm supposed to tell a joke. It's my icebreaker. I'm a little leery. Anybody here of Scottish ancestry? Oh, good, and then I can tell it. I had a faculty member recently who was in hot water because he was talking about welching on a bet. Somebody was Welsh and said that that's an insult, and he had to apologize to the student. But I'm of Scottish ancestry, and some of my friends came to me recently, and they were chatting with me about being of Irish ancestry, and what big Irish holiday is coming up? St. Patrick's Day. And they said, well, if you're Scottish, do you have a similar holiday where you dress up in kind of funny-looking clothes and you get drunk and, you know, act up? And I had to think about it for a second, and I said, yeah, we call it Saturday. Anyway, so that's my icebreaker. What I'll talk about? Well, I'm going to talk about the ins and outs of bureaucracy from kind of a low-level view. I retired as sort of a minor supervisor with the federal government, but I did work with people at higher levels, and as a matter of fact, my original training officer went on to become the director of the Drug Enforcement Administration. So I know people at various levels, and I've gotten some insights about it. What I won't talk about, What won't I talk about? I'll talk about anything, at least according to my ex-wife. But what I generally won't talk about is theories. Your instructors are far better at doing that than I can, and I've only taken one government course in my whole life. I was an undergraduate. That was about 35 years ago. And the only thing I remember about it was that the instructor was really overweight. So I can't give you much there. My first topic. Oh, yeah. Anybody have any questions now beforehand? I mean, not like, why is there air? Yes. Yes, I was. Yes. I was in the military police. To make a long story a little bit longer, back in 1969, I had screwed around in college, and the government came to me and said, we're having a little problem, can you give us a hand? And then they said, you got a choice of being in the military police or being in the infantry. And the military police just really seemed like a better bet at that time. So I stood in an intersection surrounded by sandbags and directed traffic. I said, move those trucks up the wars this way, boys. 1969, 1970, 1971. Anyway, so, and then I was a criminal investigator for a while after that for the U.S. military, which is a great job. I loved it. Anyway, anybody else? Yes, sir. What's a bureaucracy? My simple definition is it is a government entity designed to administer some policies. Does that seem reasonable? By the way, for all of you people who teach it, is that reasonable? Okay, that's what it is, and that's what it does. Is that it? Goals. What are the goals of bureaucracies? What do bureaucracies want? Well, they all want the same thing. They want more. You know, bureaucracies never go away and they never get smaller. Or most of the time they don't go away, and most of the time they don't get smaller. Because, you know, they're not here to administer those policies that we talked about, although they'll do that. They're not here to, you know, save the people money. And as a matter of fact, we'll talk about how they're actually designed to spend money. And they want more control, because more control gives you more people, more money, and ultimately allows you to get bigger. So government bureaucracies, federal government bureaucracies, really get bigger. When I started in the federal government, there were about 6,000 agents in the FBI, maybe a bit more. Anybody want to take a shot at how many people are agents in the FBI now? About 20,000. Has federal crime expanded that much? Well, we'd have to be reproducing at the rate people were during the baby boom to do something like that. Why do we have so many more agents? Well, because bureaucracies get bigger. Everybody in the federal law enforcement bureaucracy loves the second George Bush. Why? He showered them with money, right? He showered them with more people. What's the big deal about getting more people? Why do you want more people? More jobs. The pyramid gets bigger, and the people at the top are at the top of the pyramid, right? So they're higher up. So I know this will sound a little disjointed, but I had to throw this in. What's technocentricity? Come on, nobody?
Technology at the center of...
Well, we're a technocentric society. And that's what it is. It's technology is at the center of everything. And technology is really the answer for everything. And the federal government, as much as any other organization, if not more, and I mean, I had a friend of mine who worked for a Fortune 500 company, and he was amazed at how much technology we had compared to the Fortune 500 company he worked for. We had vast amounts of technology. Is that good?
It can be.
It can be. Oh, wow. Are you going to law school after you leave here?
No.
Yeah, I mean, it can be. I mean, there are lots of good things about technology. You know, in some ways, technology makes us more efficient. Not always. I'm old enough to remember the world before email. Well, you know, before email, I used to get, probably 10, 12 messages a day. 6 or 7 of them were important messages. After email, I used to get 50 or 60 messages a day. 6 or 7 of them were important. So, you know, not always. How did we get to be such a technocentric country, just in general?
Because people enjoy the convenience.
Anybody want to tell me what that is, by the way? What? Yeah, it's a P-38. World War II is what made us a technocentric country. You know, I mean, at the beginning of World War II, or at least in the United States beginning of World War II, the Axis was winning like crazy, weren't they? Well, I mean, for those of you who took a history course from somebody not named Coach, were they, the Allies were being beaten left and right. By the end, the United States developed an airplane that could travel 5,000 miles and drop a device that would incinerate an entire city. And they did it twice. They call them an atomic bomb. And lest you think that they were just shooting in the dark, I mean, there was a technology already in place to build between 8 and 10 of them every month. They could have quite literally turned the entire Japanese archipelago into a cinder. Every important place in Japan could have been completely destroyed in probably 4 or 5 months. Unbelievable. Unbelievable technology. Yes, certainly the Axis had technology, but not the way the U.S. did, not the way the Allies in general did. They really had incredible technology. I was just reading something recently where they had an interview with Winston Churchill's #1 military advisor. And they asked him, why do the Allies win? And he said, because our scientists were smarter than their scientists. And I'm sure that like an airline crash, no one thing does anything. But in that series of events, technology played an enormous part. So, is technology good? The same question I asked when I first started this. Yes? Sometimes. Are there things about technology that might not be the best in the world? Let's see. What about, solving crimes? Because that's something I'm pretty familiar with. One of my last jobs in the federal government was I investigated major gangs of people who would steal high-end products in the United States and ship it to foreign countries. Well, I had a whole crop of new people who were recent graduates of agent school, and they used to drive me crazy. They drove me nuts because they were so technology oriented that they never wanted to solve cases. What did they think? Well, they really believed, and I mean, I saw this, so this isn't a lie. What they really all believed wasn't that they were going to solve those cases. They were convinced that there was a computer program out there, and if they could just feed that data into it, it would tell them who committed the crime. And so, there are certain downsides. There are certain real, genuine downsides to the whole idea of technology. Let me see, I think, oh yeah, satellites. That's the other thing. I worked in the intelligence community for a while, and, people think that spies are people who are out there, stealing secrets, right? Somebody with suction cups coming across the ceiling of that building and slipping in there, and photographing those secrets and leaving, right? Well, probably in excess of 90% of all intelligence, and what intelligence agencies are really there to do is to get information. I mean, that's the focus of their activities, is to sweep up information and to bring it to the United States and to keep our information here. 90% of it is gained by technology, usually satellites. What's the problem with satellites? What's the problem with relying on satellites?
There's a solar flare or something that can be knocked out.
There's a man who is steeped in technology. They're only good when we are telling you, yeah, solar flares. I'm not trying to put you down, but how about this? Can you tell what Saddam Hussein is thinking with a satellite? Well, can you? No. Can you figure out that some people are plotting to blow something up if they don't use a telephone and you got a satellite? No. I mean, satellites are fantastic things. As long ago as when there were problems in Lebanon, and they were kidnapping Americans, and this isn't a big secret, so I can tell you. They would instruct people who were there, who were in danger of being kidnapped, to get their captors to take them outside at a certain time of the day and have them look up. Because guess what? You could actually use a satellite to look for that person in Beirut, a city with over 1 million people in it, and you could pick their their picture out and know where they were. So, I mean, the technology is fabulous, but it only goes so far. So, I'm kind of on the other side, that I think that the most important thing you can have to solve your problems is what? Well, common sense might be a way to put it, or a brain. And I'm going to use this buzzword so I can make all of your instructors happy. You got to be able to think critically. Because critical thinking is really what ultimately helps you out. It really helps you solve problems. So, let's see. Organizational culture is what I'm going to talk to you about for a while. By the way, let me ask a quick question. Do I have any military veterans in here? 1, 2, 3. Okay, good. Anybody in the Air Force? Okay, good, because I never considered that to be part of the military. Anyway, okay. You know, what drives an organization's culture? Well, first of all, from my perspective, I'm sure that your instructors will tell you something that's substantially different, but from my perspective, one of the things that creates a culture for any given organization is sort of the mission, the activities. You want different kinds of people to do different kinds of jobs, right? Then the kind of people you hire. You know, if you hire a certain kind of people, then they will create a certain organizational culture. When I worked in federal law enforcement, do you think we had a lot of military veterans? Oh, we had a boatload of them. I mean, it was amazing the number of people we had who were military veterans. Probably 80 to 90% of all people working in the organization were military veterans. Why? Excuse me? Well, I mean, they had experience doing all different sorts of things, you know, blowing up bridges, you know, driving tanks. I'm not sure that's law enforcement. But it sounds good. It really does. It sounds like, that's it, you know. But I think that there's, at least from my observation, there was another reason why we had so many military veterans. And here's a quick story. I was on an interview panel, and I was interviewing people for a job with our organization. And when I was interviewing people, there's this one guy who really impressed me. And I talked to him for a while, and I went home that evening. I was talking to my wife, and I said, you know, this guy really impressed me. And I discussed him for a while. And my wife said, well, of course he impressed you. He was you 20 years ago. And so, you know, one of the real reasons why federal law enforcement agencies tend to have a lot of people who are veterans is because the people who run the organizations are veterans. And they got hired back in the 1940s, in the end of World War II. They started getting hired into all these organizations, and they sort of keep it going that way. And it gets even more refined than that. In fact, different organizations will hire people from different branches of the military. Now, my wife used to work for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Well, who got hired to work for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission? Navy people. And as a matter of fact, if you work for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and you hadn't been in the Navy, people would say things about you like, well, he's pretty good for a guy that wasn't in the Navy. So, you know, part of the culture comes from that. And of course, part of the culture comes from leadership. You know, there's a component of the top down because, you know, the leaders of an organization set the tone. You know, particularly in law enforcement, do you think that leaders lead? The answer is no. They really don't. They set the tone, they give some direction, but they don't, operationally speaking, they don't really lead the organization. Not the way you would think. You know, that's just not how it works. I wanted to go through this, and I'm sorry I'm kind of jumping around, but I want to kind of give you some ideas. And what I wanted to talk to you about is local police versus federal law enforcement agencies, because, you know, everybody, just about everybody, even people in law enforcement organizations, tend to think of federal law enforcement and local law enforcement as being the same thing, just on a different level, just with a little bit different kind of focus. I'm going to suggest to you that, in fact, nothing could be further from the truth than that. They're two entirely different things. For instance, service versus arrests. Local police are really there to serve you, and they do a lot of service. When I was a local police officer, if somebody had a smell of gas, and you can see I'm not from around here because people used to heat their homes with gas. Anyway, we would get called, and we would go out there and wait around while the people from the gas company came over there. Do you think federal agencies ever respond to stuff like that? Do they really respond to any non-law enforcement activities? One of the things I was thinking about when I was putting this lecture together is informants. Do the local police need informants? The answer is maybe. But, their jobs aren't directly tied to informants giving them information. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of studies that suggest that the worst thing about a police department, or the least effective thing about a police department, is its detectives. That uniformed police do most of everything for a local police department. So, what about a federal agency? Do you think we used informants? We couldn't have functioned without informants. I mean, we would be doing nothing. We'd be sitting in the office throwing, wads of paper into garbage cans. Because it's just a totally different thing. The local police, they serve the community. They really do. There's only two kinds of chiefs of police. What are they? Anybody know? Those that have been fired and those that will be fired. But, who keeps the chief in a job? The mayor or the city manager. And, the chief, from his position, wants the local police to do what? Keep the citizens happy, because ultimately the citizens vote. And they vote for the mayor. Or they control whoever appoints the city manager or something, right? And so, do the police go out and kick ass and take names?
Only in extreme situations.
Only in extreme situations. Because, do the citizens want the police to be, throwing them up against the wall because they were going 3 miles over the speed limit? Certainly not. Absolutely not. The reality is that the local police are there to provide people with a lot of services. They're there to help the community. What about federal agencies? Do you think we really cared? When I was an agent, do you think I really cared what the citizens thought? As a matter of fact, we had a saying, if you want to be liked, go join a fire department. Because it just didn't matter to us, right? Who did we work for? We were for the president and Congress, right? And so it was a really different, it was a different environment. Local police want to reduce crime. Federal agents want to make arrests. I mean, ultimately, we used to say, the people I worked for, they'd say, oh, we want to see good cases, we want to see this, we want to see that. But what did they really want to see? They wanted to see CBA, closed by arrest. That's what they really wanted to see. As a matter of fact, our operations guy in Washington came down to see me once, and he says, man, you're putting those numbers up all over the place. This is great. He didn't care what they were. What he cared about was that those numbers were coming in. Because do you think that the president or Congress or the GAO General Accounting Office. Do you think they really, they count smiling faces? What do they count? The number of arrests the organization makes. So it's really culturally pretty different. Local police are reactive. Federal police are proactive. Local police, you've got a problem, they come out there, they talk to you about it. Federal agents, they're proactive. They want to make more and more arrests because ultimately that's where it's at for them. The local police are people-oriented while the federal agents are case-oriented. That's what they want to see. As a matter of fact, I was chatting with my ex-wife, and we were talking about our jobs, because my ex-wife was a federal agent, and so was I. And she was great. She won awards all over the place. She won incredible awards. She won the Attorney General's Award. She's got a picture of herself with Rudy Giuliani shaking her hand because she put this fantastic case together. Anyway, I told her that you will always be a better agent than I am, and I will always be a better police officer than you. Because the reality is, I really like people, and you really don't. And it's true. It's a completely different approach. Police departments, just to finish this up, police departments are about approval. Police want the approval of the community. I teach out in East Texas now, in the Beaumont area, Beaumont, Texas, which is, anybody know where Beaumont is? Yeah, I mean, it's almost in Louisiana, right? Anyway, but the local community I live in over there, I know the chief of police very, very well. If you're a police officer in that department, you better not write anybody a speeding ticket unless they're going 15 miles an hour over the speed limit. You can pull them over, you can give them a warning, but don't give them a speeding ticket. Why not? Well, you won't lose your job, and we'll talk about that. People start complaining about getting tickets, but they won't complain to the police department. Who will they complain to? The mayor. And who will the mayor complain to? The chief. And who will the chief complain to? The police officers. So, but I was going to put this in later on, but I'll do it now. Can you fire people in government jobs? No. I mean, you're really kind of bulletproof. It's almost impossible to fire you after a while. I mean, I was extra bulletproof because I was a veteran, so it was even harder to fire me. I worked in a job that was called accepted service. And accepted service meant that they could fire you at will. Except there was another law that said, well, we can fire you at will unless you're a veteran, and you will remain in accepted service, but you will have the same protections and benefits as if you were in non-accepted service, regular service. So it's almost impossible to get rid of people. So if you've got somebody that's creating problems, do you go down there and you give them a hug and say, please don't do that anymore? Yes? Well, no. That's not how it works. Do they punish you for doing things that people don't like in federal agencies, let's say? Absolutely. They don't fire you, but, suppose you're working in Dallas. How many people here like Dallas? I mean, I do. I think it's a great place, right? It's really nice. How would you like to, 30 days after you're in Dallas, be working in Newark, New Jersey? Anybody? I worked in Newark for a while. It was such a bad place that they used to steal our cars out of the basement of the federal building. It's a rat hole in any direction as far as you go. The FBI is notorious for sending people to Butte, Montana. Anybody been to Butte? Well, it's kind of this, don't think of it as this beautiful mountain state, because that's at the other end of the state. Butte, Montana is this flat, nothing place where there are coal mines underneath the city that have been on fire for 50 or 60 years, and occasionally a building will just collapse into it. It's not a nice place. Now, if you're working for a local police department, small police department's a little bit different, but if you're working for the New York City Police Department, can you be punished? Sure. You're just punished in a somewhat different way. For instance, New York is huge. Anybody been to New York at least? Yeah? Okay. Big place, right? Big place. Well, suppose you're working in a precinct in Staten Island. How much longer is it going to take you to get to the Bronx? Huh? A while, an hour at least, depending. Anybody ever see the TV series The Wire? Well, one of the things that they have there, and I think it's really one of the most realistic police shows I ever saw. The deputy chief asks people who have screwed up where they least like to go when they're being transferred out of their job, and then guess where he sends them? Right there. So, just because people don't get canned right away, and I mean you can still get canned from an organization. It takes a lot more than it does from the corporate world to do that. It's there. And this is the last thing I wanted to show you because it's kind of interesting, and it's one of my observations. The quality of people in police departments as opposed to the quality of people in federal agencies. I've come in contact with police officers from all over the country, everywhere. And I've met people who work for police departments that scared me. I mean, I would think, how in God's name do they allow this person to carry a firearm? But I also met people in local police departments who were incredibly talented, skilled people. I don't know if you guys know this, but there's a detective that works in Texarkana who's a cardiologist. There are people who have worked for Fortune 500 companies as senior executives who work for the South Lake Police Department, for instance. Again, there are also people that just, I can't understand how anybody hired them. But I never met anybody who was really dynamic who works for a federal agency. And I never met anybody who was a world-class screw-up either. And the answer is because the system is really designed to homogenize people. You make an effort not to get somebody that's really kind of messed up because they're going to create problems for you. And you really make an effort not to hire people who are outstanding because they're going to create problems for you. So what you really have are sort of people in the middle in federal agencies rather than at the top or the bottom. And as a matter of fact, I have a very good friend, Terry Salonica, who works for an agency that will not be named, and he's one of the best satellite telemetry people in the world. I mean, he's got a doctorate in physics, and he's a brilliant guy. And he always used to say to me, Ken, the system fosters mediocrity. And I'd prefer not to think of myself as being mediocre, but I really think that there tends to be people in the middle in the federal government and at the top and the bottom for local police departments. So they're somewhat different. Who do organizations recruit? Well, I sort of got ahead of myself. They recruit people to do the jobs just like anybody else. Some people who work for organizations that have been really screened And they've done a lot. You know, if you're working as a clerk someplace, I mean, how difficult is it to get a job as a clerk? Anybody can do it, right? So, you know, clerical people in a lot of federal agencies are just people. To be a federal agent, you know, it takes over a year, if you're lucky. I mean, it really takes a tremendous amount of time. You know, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to interview you. And it's not going to be, they're not going to ask you about, you know, what's your favorite TV show. They're going to ask you really pointed questions for several hours. They're going to give you a physical, and you have to be generally pretty physically fit, for instance, right? They're going to do a background investigation on you. Now, when I worked in the intelligence community, they looked at all of my tax returns for my whole life. I mean, think about it. They looked at my tax returns for my entire life. They wanted to know everything I had done. If I was unemployed for more than, I think it was 30 days, I had to justify why I was unemployed, unless I was going to school. But then they checked on everything I did at school. So, you know, it just depends. But, you know, part of what sets an organization's culture is who they recruit, right? So, you know, who do you recruit? And we can look at this just as an example. You know, let's talk about organizations and how they recruit people and how they operate. I was in the military, and the military is very what? Top down, right? As an organization, it's culturally very top down. There's a good reason for that. Why? Well, you know, they have sort of mass scale activities. I mean, you generally, except under very unusual circumstances, you don't invade a country with a couple of hundred people, right? You need a lot of people. And you need to put them in real specific places, so it's a real top-down sort of an organization, because the person that runs the organization is a general or an admiral, something like that, because they have to decide what all of those people are going to do, at least in a general sense, right? So it's really kind of top-down. And, you know, who does the military recruit? Who are they looking for? Well, at the bottom, they're looking for warm bodies, right? But at other levels, they're looking for other kinds of people. My daughter, who's, you know, a wonderful young lady and very attractive, she was dating a guy who had been a Navy pilot. What kind of a person do you think he was? Who said that? Absolutely. He was a jerk. But do you want somebody who's arrogant to be a Navy pilot? Yeah, you really do. I mean, think about it. You know, if you're coming at that aircraft carrier at 150 or 160 knots, you know, and you've got to land on it at night in a rough sea, do you want somebody who's incredibly arrogant, who believes they're bulletproof? Oh, absolutely, right? As a matter of fact, a friend of mine was a psychologist for Delta Force. What kind of people do you think they want for Delta Force? Just regular guys?
Top dogs.
Well, yeah, kind of top dog. Actually, they test people who have limited conscience. That's one of the things they want, is somebody that doesn't have much of a conscience. And I said, well, Tim, what do you mean they don't have much of a conscience? He says, well, you want a guy that's going to be able to go upstairs, you know, shoot two people to get to the guy he wants to shoot, kill him, and as he's coming downstairs, he's thinking to himself, I wonder what's for lunch. Because that's the kind of people you need. But you need people who will follow orders. I mean, you really do. You need people who will follow orders. I mean, this is good because that's the best way to get masses of people to do the same thing. But there are some downsides to this. If the general says the weapons system is good, is it good? Maybe. But if the general says it's good, what does the colonel say?
Oh, it's good.
What does the lieutenant colonel say?
It's good.
The major?
It's good.
The captain?
It's good.
First lieutenant?
It's good.
Second lieutenant?
It's good.
Good. Everybody says it's good. Who's going to be using it?
The grunt.
A sergeant, right? Do they get any say in that? Do they know if it's good? Do they have to use it? Yes. So the downside to a top-down agency and to a top-down organization that's got, real rigid discipline is there's not much going up the scale, right? So lots of times things don't work very well. Oh, by the way, just so you know, my last duty station when I was in the military was at West Point, and I gave Cadet David Petraeus a speeding ticket. Anyway, what about law enforcement? Law enforcement is really a bottom-up kind of organization. I mean, certainly the director of a law enforcement agency gives out a lot of orders and makes a lot of pronouncements. Do people follow him? Sometimes, if you feel like it. But basically, by necessity, they have to be bottom up. And so you have to hire people who can operate independently in a bottom up environment. Now, we all know that the President of the United States may have sampled some cannabis as a young man, right? Well, here's my question. Do you think that the director of the Drug Enforcement Administration has a high priority or a low priority for marijuana cases? And by the way, don't think that marijuana is legal in Colorado, because it's not. Because the state government says it is, but what does the federal government say? No, and the federal government always prompts the state. But, I'm going to tell you that the director of the Drug Enforcement Administration probably isn't sending out a lot of memos saying, we want to see a big priority on marijuana. So if you're an agent and you go out and arrest somebody for marijuana, you can't arrest somebody for having a joint in their sock. You will get in trouble for that. But say there's a big marijuana grow in Farmers Branch, and you kick the door in and you arrest these people, and there's $2 million worth of marijuana over there. Are you going to get in trouble? No. Is it a crime? Yeah, so the agency certainly isn't going to say, come on, this is a bad priority, what are you doing this for? So people have a lot more leeway in law enforcement in terms of what they do, and they tend to hire people who are more flexible as a consequence. What about the intelligence community? That's sort of an in-the-middle thing. For instance, what do intelligence agencies do? What's their job, their real job? Gather intelligence. I mean, really, they're not out, planting bombs and blowing people up and doing stuff like that. I mean, there's actually a small organization within the CIA that does that. But for the most part, they're there to gather information, suck up as much information as they can. So, believe it or not, the intelligence community is sort of a middle-driven organization, because the people who really are the recipients of that information aren't the people at the top, except in a watered-down form, and they're not the people at the bottom, because they're just getting little bits here and there. The people in in intelligence agencies are kind of people from the middle. And so there's almost sort of a managerial view of people who are running the organization, because they're sort of right there. They're in the middle. Now, just so you guys know, because I've sort of kept in touch with people, the good thing is at least the CIA isn't hiring just Ivy League people anymore. They're looking for a broader range of people. But once upon a time, I mean, if you wanted to work for the CIA, you better have graduated from an Ivy League school, Harvard. And as a good example, why did you have to go to Harvard or Yale or Princeton or Brown or something like that to get a job with the CIA? The best of the best. Well, if I had a longer time to lecture, I could tell you that lots of organizations don't and shouldn't hire the best of the best. But who's John Foster Dulles? Anybody know? No. No, please, no. John Foster Dulles was the first director of the CIA. And, you know, just by the sound of that name, where do you think he went to school? Well, Princeton, of course. And actually, the person who started the precursor to the CIA was a guy named William Donovan. And where'd he go to school? Harvard. And so, that's one of the reasons that they have Ivy League people there, or a big reason why they have Ivy League people there. Political appointees. I love them. Who are political appointees? Well, they're a small group of people at the top of the federal government who in a titular sense run federal agencies. And when we think of these people, we think of people who are cabinet members, right? But there are there's boatloads of people who are at the sub-cabinet level who are in federal agencies. Lots and lots of them. And how do you get to be in one of these appointed positions?
You get on the good side of whoever's appointing the position.
Well, in some ways, yeah. Not always. Not always. And I wanted to dispel that. I mean, one of the ways you get into one of these positions is it's a parking lot for political cronies. If your nephew Billy graduated from college and you're not sure what you're going to do with Billy, and you have just contributed $250,000 to the committee to re-elect the president, well, you can get Billy a job someplace as an under-assistant secretary of something or other, where he'll do something, right? But, who's William Gates? No, a different Gates. He's the Secretary of Defense. Now, he's a brilliant guy. I mean, he really is. I mean, we've had secretaries of state and secretaries of defense who have just been absolutely flat-out brilliant people. And they're there not because you want to park them someplace, but why? Because they've got some fabulous ideas that are necessary for the U.S. government. And so they become the heads of some pretty important agencies. By the way, this is the head of the Department of Labor. I'm not even sure who he is, and I bet nobody could even recognize him, right? He could walk by you on the street and you wouldn't know him. But, that's another reason why people are in these jobs. Now, here's the interesting thing. What do these political appointees do? Well, the Secretary of Defense really does something. But lots of political appointees really don't do much of anything. They're there for other reasons. A, as a parking place, or B, because you get a security detail. And there's nothing cooler than a security detail, right? People here familiar with what a security detail is? It's like 3 or 4 armed federal agents who are your personal lackeys. They drive your limo for you. They take you home. You know, if somebody calls you a jerk, they rough them up a little bit. You know, you're completely protected. It's so cool. You got all these guys with guns surrounding you all the time, right? So, you know, it's an ego thing. I won't tell you which agency, but there was a director of a fairly large federal agency, and he was the administrator. And so he had a bunch of franked papers, you know, documents, whatever, that said, you know, Joe Blow administrator, right? Well, he couldn't have that because he was the administrator. So what do you think he did? He had all this frank stuff thrown out and replaced with something that referred to him as the administrator. And by the way, he had a special office made for his wife next to his office so that she could help him with his social activities. You know, but I'm going to tell you, it's kind of interesting because do these people, generally speaking, control organizations? Nah, not really. They actually are insulated by people who kind of just keep them happy, and that's their job. You know, yes.
I was curious what your take was based on this conversation of the guy who said that he was in Pakistan working on with the CIA on capturing Al-Qaeda guys, and that was the reason why he couldn't do his federal bureaucratic job. And in fact, he had been out biking and walking in his local Virginia community the whole time. Catch that story about a month ago?
No, I didn't. I mean, I know about the other guy, the guy that shot 3 people, but I don't know how. I can tell you about that later on. You'll get a. That's actually very true.
Okay, so what you described could perfectly explain how this guy got away with what he got away with.
Oh yeah, I mean, because you know if you're a political appointee, I mean you don't have a real job in most cases. I mean not always. Again, if you're working for, I mean the chairperson of the Fed, are you working? You betcha, you are working all the time. It's a really important job, and the only people who get to be chairs of the Fed now are people with incredible intellects and fantastic abilities. It's that simple. Whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, or a Bocanist, it just doesn't matter. You are one smart person. But there are all different sorts of other agencies where you're just hanging. And sometimes this gets, politicians into trouble. Who was old Brownie? Anybody know? Well, he was the head of FEMA, and he had a hard time walking outside of his office because he couldn't find his way. And that's fine as long as there's no national disasters, but then if a national disaster comes along and you're there with your mouth open, it creates problems for the administration, right? But for instance, as I told you, a friend of mine was the director of the Drug Enforcement Administration. Did he run the Drug Enforcement Administration? Yes, but he wasn't the administrator of the Drug Enforcement Administration. That was a congressman who was always running on family values until a local newspaper took pictures of him and his mistress on vacation in Bermuda. And so you had to put him someplace, and so he was the administrator of the Drug Enforcement Administration. Do you think that he was doing a lot of drug enforcing? No, he spent all of his time trying to angle how he could get back into office. And that's one of the other things that people become appointees for, is to sort of get a job, in politics. You want to get your name in the paper and get recognized. There's no bad publicity, right? So, and then everybody else is a career employee. And basically they're just folks, just like us. Although, you know, for the people who have negative things to say about lazy career government employees, there's a lot of people who work very hard and do a really good job. Just to let you know, if you're a special agent, you don't work 40 hours a week. You are required to work 50 hours a week. So, I mean, that's 50 hours a week, every week for your entire career. It's called administratively uncontrolled overtime. Anyway, because I got to get going, let's just talk a little bit about turf. I love turf. You know, getting back to the beginning when we talked about how agencies want to get bigger, what do you want to do with your turf? You want your turf to be bigger, right? You want more stuff to do if you are in an organization. The organization wants more stuff. Boy, I love air piracy. That is so cool. Who is responsible for air piracy? Well, it's kind of interesting. If the people engaged in air piracy are walking to the airplane, the Transportation Security Agency is responsible for air piracy. If they get on the airplane, the Federal Bureau of Investigation is responsible for air piracy. If they close the door in the airplane, the air marshals are responsible for it. And if the plane leaves the ground, the Federal Aviation Administration is responsible for it. And people in these organizations will jealously guard this. They will fight about this because, you know, turf is everything. Because that's how you get your organization's responsibilities, is what you're responsible for. The FBI and the United States Marshal Service had a 3 or 4 year battle going over who should be arresting fugitives. Yes, somebody? Okay. Who should be, Yes.
So if somebody gets on the plane that's going to commit a crime, and he's on the plane, the FBI agent gets on the plane and arrests him.
Right.
And they shut the door. Is he all of a sudden out of his jurisdiction right before he arrests him?
You know what? You may want to go to work for a federal agency immediately because the answer is who knows, right? I mean,
does he get off? Is it not valid if the FBI agent arrests him?
well, an arrest is an arrest is an arrest. That doesn't matter. You know, what this may cause, of course, is that somebody from the Air Marshal's Service may be in an argument with somebody from the FBI, but I mean, the arrest is still an arrest. Air piracy is still air piracy. But, you know, the point is that people argue about being responsible, not necessarily about making an arrest. Does that make sense? Okay. So, yeah, it's one of these things where everybody has their turf. Oh, there it is. Good. Come on, don't do this to me. Good stuff. Just a few things I wanted to mention in passing. Kind of the end of this. I love to talk about New Year's Eve. When is New Year's Eve? What?
December 31st.
Hell no. September 30th. How come? It's the end of the fiscal year for the federal government. Well, does this have any meaning or significance? Well, this is kind of neat. You know, what do you want to do, economically speaking, on September 30th in a federal agency? You want to be broke. You want to have cooked up all your money and maybe even obligated yourself for some money that you don't have. You don't have any money for that yet. Why? Because you get more money next year, right? If you save money, guess what? You didn't need that much, so we're not going to give you that much. Some agencies do a real good job, and they actually have a list of good things that they want, but they don't absolutely need, and they'll spend it at the end of the year. But I mean, I had 4 bulletproof vests, including a ballistic vest. For those of you who are uninitiated, a ballistic vest is this vest that comes down to here, and it's got plates, specially designed plastic plates throughout it to resist really heavy weapons. You know how many times I wore it? Once. Yeah, when I got it, I tried it on. I said, oh, wow, they actually got it in my size. And then what did I do with it? I left it in the office. I had it hanging up over there so people would come over and see me and they go, "Ooh, wow, that's cool," Did I ever use it? No. I had a real thin vest, and if I was going out to make an arrest, I'd throw that thing on. That's it. Why did I have those 4 vests? Why? It's the end of the fiscal year. You had to spend money on something. They put all new sirens in our cars one year. So, that's how money gets wasted, along with a lot of other things. Anybody here familiar with Alien Gonzalez? Who's Alien Gonzalez?
He was the little boy, Florida. Yeah, he was brought over to America.
Well, I was intimately involved with Alien. And I was assigned to a group of people who was going to snatch Alien up and put him on a plane back to Cuba, because ultimately, legally, he needed to go back to Cuba. There's no doubt about it. I watched as an unnamed government agency went out and chartered an airplane to fly people, just literally flew all around the United States and picked up federal agents and brought them to Miami before Alien was arrested. Why? Because people were worried that the Cuban community was going to burn down Little Havana. I got to tell you, they weren't going to burn down Little Havana. Why not? Who do you think built Little Havana? The Cuban community. They were the people who created Little Havana. You think they're going to burn it down? But one of the things about government is that people that run these organizations are incredibly risk averse. And we allow them to spend money. Now, the chances that people would have actually burned down Little Havana are about 1 in 10,000. But, anybody here see Casino? Well, at the end of Casino, they're talking about, who might snitch them out and who might not. And so they're shooting everybody they thought would snitch them out. And they're having a conference about this, and one of the gangsters said, first guy says, he won't tell. And the second guy says, used to be a Marine. He'll keep his mouth shut. And they go down the list of all these mobsters, and each one says, no, we don't need to worry about this guy. And the last guy says, why take a chance? And they go out and shoot the guy. So the same thing is true in the federal government. You know, people are at a position where they're risk averse. And believe me, if by some incredible set of circumstances somebody would have burned down Little Havana. Actually, the only thing they did was they did throw some matches into a large garbage container and it caught fire. That was it. Anyway, so any more questions? Nobody? Why is there air? Something? How come the sky's blue? It's not. It just looks blue.
During the Elian Gonzalez event,
Yeah.
what was your read on Janet Reno and the other things that were happening back in Washington at that time?
I have a particular dislike for Miss Reno, so I might not be the best person to ask that question of. Some years before that, when she was in Florida as a prosecutor, she tried to indict a friend of mine for murder when he was investigating a drug crime, and the individual he was investigating hit him with his car and threw him on the hood, and he pointed a gun through the windshield and said, "Stop or I'll shoot you," as he's driving down the street at 60 miles an hour. He failed to stop, so he shot him through the head. And Janet Reno tried to have him indicted. So I'm not the guy to ask. Yes?
I was going to ask, just a thought. Do you think all the organizations, the federal organizations, have an incentive to rise above one another?
Well, I hate to say, because I'm not sure what you mean by rise above.
Being kind of control the other organizations.
Oh, sure, absolutely. I mean, not all of them, but everybody would love to suck up some extra people. Several times the FBI tried to take over the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, believe me.
Anytime you give somebody power, control, and money, they're going to try to get more of it.
Sure. And I mean, it's all about power. I mean, it's really not about money. It's about power. You know, I mean, the highest paid person in the federal government is probably making $150,000, $160,000 a year, which, you know, I mean, it's a lot better than what a lot of people make, but it's not a lot of money. Believe me, it's not a lot of money. I mean, for instance, why do you think somebody becomes a federal judge? Because they want money? There are just boatloads of attorneys making more money than federal judges are. Believe me. Yes, more. Something else. Yes, sir.
In your experience, did you ever talk about kinetic bombardment, that military tactic?
Kinetic bombardment. I used to carry a 8-shot 45 caliber pistol and an M16, and I never fired either. So I don't know what kinetic bombardment is.
It's just dropping huge projectiles from space.
That was I was pre-Reagan administration, so.
What do you think about the creation of the Department of Homeland Security?
I think, as somebody that was employed by Homeland Security, I have to say, I think that it was a good idea, but like everything else, you know, you can't create it overnight. It's, you know, don't expect. There was sort of an expectation that, you know, the Department of Homeland Security would have, you know, teething problems for 6 months or a year. And in fact, a government agency is going to have teething problems for 10 or 12 years. And so, you know, it will take a long, long time to have it become cohesive as an organization. But I thought it was a good idea. I thought it was a good way to consolidate people. And quite frankly, the Justice Department is sort of the 800-pound gorilla in the federal government, and this kind of balances the Justice Department out.
Okay, we can take one more question.
Or not.
What are your views on the
The NSA? Good, not great. It's a good organization. It does a lot of good things. It's really huge. I mean, although you don't hear much about it, it's really a big intelligence organization. Well, I don't know if it has more people than the CIA, because nobody knows how many people there are in the CIA or the NSA. It's got a lot of people. It does a good job, but it's got some morale issues because it's so huge that, you know, it's a place where it's so big that you can hide out if you want to, if you understand what I'm saying. I will tell you one last quick one. You'll like this. When I went to work for an intelligence organization, the first day there, they greeted me, and they said, "We're going to get you a higher clearance than you have right now." And I said, "Well, what clearance are you going to give me?" And they said, "We're going to give you the highest clearance there is." And I said, "You're going to get me a Q?" Which is actually a nuclear weapons clearance. And the individual who's talking to me says, "No, it's higher than a Q." And I said, "Well, I didn't think there was anything higher than a Q." And the guy said, "There is, but it's a secret." I'm serious. Anyway, you guys have a great day. You've been a fantastic audience. Thank you so much.